Hello everybody, it's the middle of March and it's a little bit chilly out today. The wind's blowing quite a bit, that's typical for March, and the crappie are getting ready to spawn. But I wanted to start now and give you some helpful hints on how to jig for crappie, starting with the spawn, but also from around April all the way through October. This is the technique I use and have a lot of success with, so I hope it helps you. And what I want to start with is the tackle that I use. So I have an 8-foot pro angler crappie rod. Two advantages to having an 8-foot rod. One is depth control. You have a rod that you can find out very quickly how deep you're fishing. So here, if I have the jig at the end of the rod, I know that I have 8 feet of line out. And roughly from the reel to the first eye is 2 feet, so I can go to 10 foot and to 12 foot and so on very quickly and easily. So that's one advantage. The other advantage is the hook set. You don't have to I guess be a physicist to understand you got more leverage with an 8-foot rod, and when a fish strikes, you got a long sweep, a long swing where you can set that hook. Which is not, you don't have that advantage on a shorter rod. But nothing against shorter rods, I use them all the time, especially when I take kids fishing. But the 8-foot rod for me gives you a better hook set, in my opinion. So I also like to use a bait cast reel. The reason again is depth control. It's a little easier to click a button and let the line out, click it back, rather than opening the bail and spooling it, and then you might get a bite and you're setting the hook and the line's coming off at the same time. I've had that happen to me before as well. And the bait caster is just easier for control. Now for a jig, my favorite go-to color here in Texas is a black and chartreuse. Now, if they're not biting this jig very well, or if the fish are striking it or just tapping it and I'm missing a lot of fish, I'll switch over to a white and chartreuse. I go to the opposite end of the spectrum on contrast, and usually that does the trick. I don't get too hung up on color, and I know you've probably heard this over and over again on TV shows, is fish with what you have confidence in, and I really do believe in that. There's a lot of times when I change from black and chartreuse just to try another color. I use it for 5 minutes, I don't catch a fish, I'm like, I go back to my go-to bait, which is black and chartreuse. I have 10-pound test on this. This really helps reduce the number of line breaks. The fish don't seem to mind the heavier line. And I have an 1/8 ounce sickle hook jig head on here. With the 10-pound test and the soft plastic bait, it falls a little slower than a, I guess you'd call a bucktail type of a bait. So that combination works well for me, and I'll go ahead and talk now about technique. So what I like to do when I go fishing post-spawn and through the summer is, first thing you got to do, I'll give you a top 5. Okay, top 5 things for fishing. Number 1 is location. Number 2 is location. Number 3 is location. Haha, very funny, Mike. But the reason why I say that is I can't emphasize enough how important location is for crappie fishing. If you're not in the right location, you're as good as fishing where I am right now on dry land. You're going to fish there. It might look like a fishy spot, but you're not going to catch any fish. So the important thing is to have you some good fishing locations, places where you know you can catch fish. That's going to take some time on the water. Maybe some folks are willing to share some information, but that's the number 1, 2, and 3 things is location. Okay, if you don't have that, you're not going to catch any fish. Now for crappie fishing, number 2 is depth. Now there's 2 kinds of depth, and I'll explain. People will go, I caught 20 crappie today off a timber in 20 foot of water. Well, did you catch them 20 feet deep, or did you catch them in a total of 20 foot of water? That is very important. I typically catch fish from 10 to 18 feet deep on my home lake, Lake Lavon, between the months of April all the way into October. So what does that mean? Does that mean that I was fishing 10 to 8 feet deep? No. That means the fish were suspended 10 to 18 feet deep. That's the depth I caught the fish. People might go, I caught 20 fish, 10 feet down. Well, he probably caught the fish 10 feet from the surface. He may have been fishing 10 feet of water. It's very common to catch fish at a certain depth all over the lake, and they're in a certain depth range. So I typically catch fish most commonly 12 to 14 feet deep on my home lake, but I'm fishing anywhere from 14 to 20 foot of water, and that's important. So you might say, I fished 12 foot of water all day, I didn't catch a fish. Well, that doesn't mean the crappie are in 12 foot of water. They're in 18 foot of water, but they're 12 foot down, suspended off the bottom. So that's the number 2 most important thing, or actually 4th behind location, location, location. So first thing you got to do is find where the fish are. That's the hardest part about crappie fishing. Number 2 is know the depth that they're in. Crappie see upwards, in an upwards direction. Okay? If you drop a jig below them, they're not going to see it. They're not going to bite it. So depth is important. After that is presentation. So presentation is now once you got the location and the depth down, presentation is another important thing. Beyond that, all the other little details are probably a power of 10 factor less important. Okay, and that comes to color and jig and size and all that. In my opinion, in my experience and my success, I may get some comments back that say, Mike, you're crazy, but this is what's proven successful to me. So now I know the location, I know the depth that my fish are at, and typically you find that out by catching your first one. So I start out at a particular depth. Okay, let's say I want to start 4 feet deep. I'm fishing. In the video that comes after this, I'm going to be fishing around 14 feet deep of water, total water. But the fish are anywhere from 10 to 12 feet down. So I'll start out at 8 foot. Okay, so I throw my jig out like this. I'm at 8 foot deep, and now I click it over and I'll tap the jig very gently down up. Okay. Beginners will typically make the mistake of jigging this jig all crazy, all over the place, just jumping around and whatever. So I try to do a funny little analogy here, and that's let's say you go out to a nightclub and you're a guy and you're hanging out with a bunch of guys, and a beautiful woman walks in the room. Okay, and she walks over, and similar to my jig presentation, I just tap it down and up. Boom. Okay. That's a wink. Let's say she winks at you. She just gives you a little wink. Wow, I think she likes me. I'm going to go over to her and talk to her. Well, a crappie, the same thing. You just, little wink. He's interested. He comes over and he strikes it. Now, if the girl comes into the club and you're standing there with a bunch of guys, and she walks in, she looks at you, and all of a sudden she starts flailing her arms around and jumping left and right and going crazy, you're probably going to stay where you're at, and you'll probably look at the other guys and go, she's a little crazy. I'm not too interested in that one. So just think of it that way. That if you send a jig down there and it's going left and right and crazy up and down, that's not a natural. Fish don't do that. They can't dart, 100 miles an hour in 10 different directions in a second. So you want to make the bait look natural, and sometimes that means not moving the jig at all. The most I move a jig is 3. I'll go tap, 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 and that's probably because it's hard for me to sit still. I'm usually excited when I'm out there fishing, but after I tap it from 1 to 3 times, I hold it still for a couple of seconds at least. There are times when you'll find where you might get distracted. You're holding your rod at a certain depth and you're not moving it, and you're reaching over to get your drink, and your jig is doing nothing. It's just sitting there at that depth, and that's when the crappie hits it, and that's a clue to me that, oh, they don't want it moving today. So just drop it to the right depth and hold it still. So that has to do with presentation. There's more that can be said about that. But to keep it simple, get the jig to the right depth, just tap it down and up. One little tap with one little twitch with the tip of your rod, no big major swing, and you should have some success. Now, I also want to cover just a little bit of some crappie myths maybe. You may hear people who post on forums or talk on TV or whatever, will say, well, there's a little trick to how you catch the fish. Well, let me expose a little bit of that. You have a jig and you're in a three-dimensional space, okay? What can the jig do in this three-dimensional space? It can go up and down, it can go left and right, and it can go forwards or backwards. So what can you do in that space? Well, you can raise the jig up, you can drop it down, you can move it from side to side, you know, in that three-dimensional space, and that's basically it. So here's the trick. Sometimes the crappie like the jig on the fall. Sometimes the crappie like the jig when you're raising it up. Sometimes the crappie like it when you're pulling it away from them, from side to side. And they see that bait's going away. Well, I better take my chance, and they come and grab it. So those are some of the little tricks. You know, people might say, well, I had a trick, and that's why I caught the most fish. That's really it. Try those few little simple things, and you'll know the trick for that day. Crappie seem to like it on the fall better today. Crappie seem to like it when you're raising it up slightly. Crappie seem to like it when you don't move it at all. That's really the trick. I can tell you from experience that, you know, when I first got started in crappie fishing, that crappie drove me nuts. I'd go out fishing, I'd catch 3 fish. That was a good day for me. I'd see posts every day of people catching 30, 40, 50 fish. Oh, and by the way, it was a slow day. I wanted to throw my computer on the floor and just go nuts because the fish were so frustrating for me. But what I just covered is basically it for crappie. There's a lot of other little information that you can have fun finding out, but number 1 is location, number 2 is depth, and then number 3 is presentation. All the rest, I think, go way below the priority in how you approach and catch crappie. And now this, in particular, this is jig fishing. You can go to the same spots and use minnows if you like. I prefer a jig. I used to never leave the dock without minnows because I didn't have confidence in what I was doing with a jig. But you know, now with a lot of experience, I'd prefer to catch crappie on a jig. You can catch a fish, you can put them in your, measure the fish, put them in your cooler or live well, and be back fishing again in just a few seconds. So before I cut over to the footage, I want to show you one last thing about presentation. I'm going to come close to the camera. Now, so here's my jig, sickle hook, which is very sharp. And if you get a crappie bite, which feels like a thump, and the way I like to simulate that is to have somebody hold out their arm, and I'll take my finger and go like that. Just tap it really fast. That's kind of what you feel on the end of the pole. When you feel that, set the hook. If you miss a fish, bring your jig up, especially if you have one like this. If you have a bucktail, you don't have to do this. But if you have a jig like this, what will happen sometimes is the crappie will pull that skirt down. Okay? You don't want to send this jig back down like this. Okay? Reel up the line, push the jig back all the way up against the jig head, and now send it back down. I also like to pull my knot closer to the back here so that the jig stays a little more vertical. Now, some crappie fishermen like to have it like this because when they say the approach of the fish comes up, they'll bite down and it's a better hook set. Some crappie fishermen will also like to bend their hook downwards because of that. The fish is coming up with his mouth like this and he bites down. You know, they feel like if the jig is vertical, horizontal to the ground, they'll miss the fish. So they'll have the jig a little like this, so when the fish bites down, they get a better hook set. I really haven't noticed a difference. You can try it for yourself. Usually when the fish inhales the bait and they go to bite down on it, I set the hook. I haven't really noticed that much of a difference. I may try some more of that in the future, but this works fine for me. Jig just presented like this, and just jigging it down and up just a little bit like that. There you go. That's what I do, I'd say 80–90% of the time. Sometimes I hold it steady, and sometimes I'd move it up slow or move it down slow. Okay? Alright, well, enjoy the footage, and I hope this helps you.
Okay, so we're approaching our crappie spot here in slow motion. What you're going to see at this spot is a stump, and then there's a brush pile next to it. So I'll let you know when that's coming. So here comes the stump, and then the brush pile will start to show up next to it. And what I'm going to do is throw my buoy into the wind about 5 to 10 feet away from the brush pile so I don't get tangled up to it when I'm fishing. So there we go. We're launching our buoy, and now we can approach the brush pile without tangling up with our buoy. Okay, so here we go. Starting to fish. I want you to watch this carefully. I'm jigging just like I showed earlier, and when the fish strikes, here I go. I set the hook and bring them in. Now I want to replay this in slow motion for you because the crappie thumps in this particular shot. The crappie thumps the jig, and you can actually see it on the end of the rod. So I'm going to replay this in slow motion. Watch the rod carefully. Thump right there. Now we set the hook, and we got our fish. So I'll just speed it up here so we don't have to wait through the whole thing. And this is what you do over and over and over again. So again, we're fishing. Set the hook on another fish. Bring them in. And just repeat this. Now, you'll catch a few fish off of a spot. Sometimes you may catch 5. You may catch 10. You catch a few fish, and then the bite slows down. It's good to then move to another spot. There you can see I just missed a fish. Okay, make sure my skirt is still on there. Oh, got him this time. And there he is. So, right after I get this fish off, show him to you, I'm going to go ahead and get set again. You can see I got about 5-6 fish in the cooler already. Probably going to move to another spot soon. Here, you'll notice here in just a second I got me a catfish, and the reason why I wanted to show you this is I made a mistake, and you'll see a little bit of that here in just a second. So I get this catfish, and if you know, catfish have spines on them, and here it is. I do this little cute thing where I have the catfish showing us saying, now watch when I throw this fish over, his right little spike got me between my thumb and my index finger. And I'll show you that in a second. Now I'm going ahead and I'm putting my line back out, and there I am showing you my little cut. It starts to bleed a little bit later in the video. If I kept showing you the video, you'll see it starts to bleed. So when you release catfish, don't do what I just did. Release them head first. Oh, I just missed a fish there. You might have been able to see the thump, and I get another shot at him. And there he is. Well, I hope you enjoyed this footage, and I'll show you some more footage to just enjoy. I hope this helps.